We're really doing it. It is the first ever episode of the Unmeasured podcast. I just want to take a minute to soak this in because this is such a dream come true. And I wanted to do this for so long. And now we're really doing it. And I cannot think of a better first episode co host to have here with me than the queen of podcasting herself, the woman who taught me what the F a podcast was, over 10 years ago when we first became friends. Katie Dalebout, I'm so happy that you're here with me and with our community today on the Unmeasured podcast.
What an honor and a privilege. Congratulations. I've been telling you for years you should have a podcast.
I finally got it together and we're making it happen. And you know how when you start something, people always say oh, you're with the podcast. Let's use that as an example. Your first episode is going to be your worst episode. It's only going to get better from here. And I'm like, well, listen, if this is going to be my worst episode, I got to bring someone on who knows what they're doing, and nobody knows what they're doing on a podcast more than you. So if my ship starts to sink, we'll just jump onto yours and we're going to be fine.
Uh-oh, I just moved something with my foot. See, this is how good I am. I think I don't know how great of a choice you made, but that is very kind. And thank you for saying that. I am by far not, by no means am I an expert in anything. And podcasting is definitely one of those things I'm not an expert in, but I have been doing it for a long time, very long time. And I don't know if it was your first time being a guest on a podcast, but you have been a guest on the podcast more than anybody except my friend Sasha, I think. And I hope you'll be a guest many, many times more. And and when I said I've been telling you for years you should have a podcast, it was only selfishly so I would get to hear your voice whenever I wanted to. And also because I do get to talk to you on the phone and voice texting, and I haven't seen you in way too long, which is a whole nother issue, but we will see each other soon or in person. And I wanted more people to be able to experience that. And you're so good at obviously speaking, and I've heard you give talks, I've heard you host panels, I've heard you in conversation, but also you're so funny, you're so dynamic, and the way you obviously work with clients, and then on video too, you've done so many, and being on the other side of interviews, done so many, you're so dynamic. I just knew you'd be so good at it and it will come naturally to you. So I just think it's going to be I have a really good feeling about it. I think it's going to be a really good medium for you. I think you're going to have fun with it. I think it's going to be, and it's a really, the medium of podcasting, it's a welcome phenomenon in a way, because it's slower, it's been around forever. We've been telling stories as mankind like more than reading for a longer time than we've read, and so it comes now, we can listen quicker than we can read. We can, there's something very intimate about it because people multitask when they're doing it. You're taking people with you driving or folding laundry or whatever. And I don't know. I think it's going to be good for you. Like, I think you're going to enjoy it as much as people are going to enjoy listening.
Thank you so much, Katie. And you said, that you're not an expert in podcasting, but I have to say that I think that that's not true. And I want to share with everyone all of the amazing things that you do. To me, you are the person who knows more about podcasting and is just such an incredible host. It's absolutely amazing. You are a writer, an interviewer, a host. Your weekly interview podcast, Let It Out, began in 2013, now has over 400 episodes with nearly 7 million downloads. This is amazing. In 2019, you also started co-hosting and producing the mental health show Spiraling, another podcast, which is fantastic. And because I am someone who experiences anxiety, I have just gotten so much from Spiraling as well. And I'm so thankful to you for creating both of those podcasts. In 2016, your book, Let It Out, was published by Hay House. You now teach workshops, an online class for independent podcasts. You run an accountability support group called In Process, consults, and you also write a weekly newsletter. I love that you say that you live in LA, but you walk like you still live in New York City. You love your daily walks.
Yeah, I do. And you have to unfortunate, so do you.
I
You are
do.
the
I love
you're
them.
the you're the unfortunate recipient of the plethora of voice texts that just get longer and longer when I'm walking.
I love it. It makes me so happy. It makes me so, so happy. I know a little bit about why you first started podcasting, but I would love for you to share a little bit about what drew you to podcasting in the first place before we dive into, the question of today's episode, because like millions of downloads, it's really, really amazing to think that you started this, this medium in 2013 before a lot of people were doing it. Which like I feel like now everyone has a podcast, which is one of the reasons why for a while I thought I shouldn't start a podcast. Everyone already has one. But you started a podcast like before everyone had one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, timing. We've spoken about this with other aspects of our work too, like with in a social media sort of a way, or in with sending out emails or whatever it is. Like since we've been doing it for a long time, it changes, and it's so different than how it was when it began. Like I think email is a really good example. Like you and I have both been sending out an email newsletter since 2013 or around that time. For you, I think maybe even before that. But when now everybody's on Substack and everybody has a newsletter, and it's just blogging in a different way, like it's but there can be a little bit of like, oh wow, it was just a timing issue. I think the reason I got into it, because at that time, and it honestly, it gave me a little bit of momentum, and it gave me a little bit of, I think, the there was more space, obviously, and I was one of fewer, at least, people who looked like me and were I had youth on my side. I had like a lot of privilege on my side, and one of those privileges being like this confidence that I had in my youth. I was 22, and to take you back of like why I even was like, this podcasting was because, as you know, I studied broadcast journalism in college, and I was in college, and all of the prereqs for, I wanted to be a TV news reporter and on camera video stuff, and all the prereqs for the video classes were radio. So we were studying NPR, and we were studying these interviewing shows, sort of. It was like a little bit part of the curriculum, so it gave me it open I that's the first time I learned about that stuff, because I didn't a lot of people I know now like grew up listening to NPR and had it on the back. Like I didn't know what NPR was until I was in college. Like my mom, I think you do know this, she's a big pop music top 40 radio guy, and so she's always, we would listen to the radio, it would be top 40. And so I never heard talk radio really until college. And then when I moved away after college, I had this blog, and I was teaching yoga, and I was into wellness at the time. So that's what the niche. So I had a niche, and then I had interest, and the other privilege I had on my side was that I can kind of talk to anybody. Like I sort of had, again, it was sort of that confidence, I think, but I could just cold email people and be like, hey, I have a podcast, I'm like 4 years old, isn't that cool? And I think at the time, like the other privilege I had was like, people didn't know really what podcasting was, but they had a vague idea of it, and then they would just see that I had a well-designed album cover and a link on iTunes. And to them, they were like, oh, she's on iTunes. I mean, like, but like everybody can be on iTunes, kind of like now how Spotify, like anybody can put their music, like there were no gatekeepers. There were no gatekeepers, but like people didn't know there weren't gatekeepers. So here I was emailing them to be, people who at the time I really, and I still do, like I really looked up to in their field. And a lot of it was wellness and self-help, and but it was so cool, because here I was like, I would read somebody's book, or I would watch a YouTube video of them, and then I would very easily figure out what their email was, or what their assistant's email was, or what their publicist's email was, send a cold email that was just like, hey, I love your work for these reasons, really genuine, really earnest. I would love to, and ask, thank you so much. No problem. Just in case, if you want to, no problem. Please feel free to say no. If you would give me an hour of your time to do this podcast, and I would send the link. And the more I did it, the more I had a little bit of legitimacy, because I had an archive of their peers. Like if I had a bunch of their friends on, I would be like, I've also interviewed so and so and so and so. And so they were like, oh, well, she did it. Like, okay. And the barrier to entry was quite low. Like or I guess the ask for them was quite low. Like I was asking for an hour of their time, but they didn't have to prepare anything. They didn't have to think about it. They just had to show up. And to them, they were like, I'll reach a new audience, or I'll just like talk about my work for an hour with this fan, like, and it was, sort of a make a wish to me, but I was getting all these like free coaching sessions or free like ask, and I think at one point I had really bad acne and I wanted to heal it holistically. So I got onto this wormhole of um, holistic acne healers and what you should eat. And I mean, it's stuff that I don't even necessarily buy now, or wouldn't even, whatever my thing that I was into was at the time, whether it was healing my acne, or I mean, you probably remember them better than I do, of, whatever topic I was into, I would just email, and I still do this. I email the people, the book that I read, the whatever it is. And it doesn't happen every time, but I get to either have a conversation with them and like ask what I wanted to know and share it with other people, which is really cool. And it's kind of a rising tide lifts all boats, because it does bring more people to their work, hopefully, and now more so than back then. But it was also, just sort of right place, right time. And anyway, and I also, the other thing I should say too is like the tech side of it, of like how to get it to iTunes and what microphone to get and all of that. Like I just started, like I started with the headphones I had from my computer. I just did it, but I did have, as you know, help. Like I get really overwhelmed by that sort of thing, and I sort of knew editing, but not well. And I think about this all the time, because even like the way I edit is still how I was dating this person named Adam, as you know, and he taught me how to edit in GarageBand, and he taught me the keyword commands, and he taught me like how to use a Macintosh. I was at the Apple store recently, and they were like, these are all like really kind of antiquated things you do on here, like from like 10 years ago. And I was like, oh yeah, it's all my tricks that, but I
Vintage.
had this, yeah, exactly. Like I had this supportive person where like I could be in my zone of genius. Like I could be doing the part that I liked, which was prepping for an interview, researching, going down a rabbit hole, speaking to someone, and then promoting it, and then sharing it on social media, all of that. We weren't making clips then, but like I got to do what I thought of then, and still do, is like all the fun parts. And he would take care of the rest, so I could do the fun part. So I can't say that I would have actually done it or kept doing it if I hadn't had his initial support, which I, since sort of replaced with other people that I paid to help me, and have taken on, a lot of it myself, and now do it for other people. So it's, it's changed, but that was the beginning of it.
I love hearing about the start of the podcast and how you had that confidence. And I don't know if like this resonates with you, but it's almost like a beginner's confidence, a confidence that you have in yourself around something where you don't know all of the hurdles that you're going to be met with yet. And you can just be like really excited about what's about to happen and really believing in yourself. The question that I would love for us to chat about today, which came from someone in our community, is a great segue off of that confidence, which is, what's something you realized you wrote off for yourself? Why do you think you did? And how did you open yourself up to and believe in this option for yourself? So I feel like it's almost like those moments in life where you might have the opposite of confidence in yourself, something that you feel like you wouldn't be able to do, and what that might be for you. And I wonder if at any points, like, has it ever been podcasting? Like, as things have changed or as you've grown, like, have you ever felt that around anything with podcasting, or like maybe something else in life?
Yeah, I mean, it's, well, I I was gonna make the joke, like when we talk about the confidence, like where'd it go? You like, I
Yeah.
don't have that anymore. I think it's something that we talk about, I think, a lot privately, is like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it ebbs and flows, but it's interesting that I admire that person from 10 years ago. You know, I cringe at a lot of the things she would do or say, or I have that app Time Hop, as you know, because I send you, you know, photos from years ago whenever they pop up of you. But often I'm like, I see a very earnest post I wrote and I'm just like, oh my God. Like, because now I think earnestness is sort of cringe in a way it wasn't back then, which I think is a problem. Like, I think it's uncool to do these things that before were cool, or it's all perception and it's all sort of warped in our mind. And that's kind of the thing that, I don't know, it's kind of hard to conceptualize. Like, I admire a lot of aspects of my past self, and I also wonder what my past self would think of me now. Like, would they be like, oh wow, pretty cool how that shook out, or like, oh yikes, I didn't think it'd go that way. Like, I don't know. And it, so with this question, you told me it like a week ago, and I liked it and I thought about it, and then I forgot about it. And as you know, I asked you this morning, and I was thinking about it on my hike, and I had a couple of things come to mind. But what would you say to this question? I feel like I need to hear your answer before I know.
Totally. So before I answer, I just have to say that when you were talking about your mom listening to top 40 music and all of that, I was thinking about how being here with this microphone, I'm like, I feel like Delilah. Did you ever listen to her on the
Of
radio?
course.
Okay. I'm
Of
like,
course.
Delilah. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's like this, and like, is this how Delilah felt like every day at her job? This is awesome. Um, and for me, I think something that I wrote off for myself, like as early as when I was listening to Delilah, as when I was a kid, is more less of a specific thing, although I can name many specific things that fell under this umbrella, but almost more of like a personality trait or a way of being, and that's creative. Like, I think what I wrote off for myself was that like I am a creative person. And I think growing up, I always liked things that were more I things that were more structured came more naturally to me. So things like math was always an easy for me because there was a formula and you could plug into it. And it's just like you learn the structure and then it's easy peasy. Like that was how it felt in
Not
my
for all of us.
that was how my brain worked. And even like band, I loved band. Band was like a big part of my life growing up because to me, music was like math. I'm like, you just look at the music, you read the music, it's like a math problem. And then whatever the note says, you just, hold those fingers down. And then that is how you make music. And so for me, it was things that felt very like straightforward. And I think I have a very creative sister who people like identify her as more creative, and she's always had like incredibly creative interests. And so I always felt like the not creative one. And I think I really wrote that off for myself for a really long time. And it's only, been in the last handful of years where I felt like, you know what? Actually, I am very creative, even if I can't sit down and necessarily make like visual art, that I have a brain that wants to think creatively about things and wants to create. Like, I want to create things. And that feels like such a part of who I am now. And so I think it was for me writing off like being a creative person and then needing to find ways to like reconnect with that. And when I think about moments in my life where I've thought like, oh, I wish I could do that, or I wish I could have that. It's always been around something um that is more creative. Like as a kid and like even in college, my dream job was to be on The View. I was like, I just want to be on The View. Like I want to sit at a table. I want to like have conversations. I want to be like thinking about things and like forming opinions. And like, how fun would that be as a
It'd be
job?
so good.
Like
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like that was like a dream job then. And then when I was practicing law and I was thinking about leaving, I remember that I picked up a book, an Emily Giffin book, and it was like the Something Borrowed Blue books, whatever, like that
Mm-hmm.
series. And I remember reading her bio. And I will never forget this moment where I think it said she went to, I'm like, I'll never forget this moment, but watch me like botch the actual facts of this. But I think
No
it
one will know.
said, there's no, this is an armchair expert. There's not going to be a fact check at the end. So everyone can just Google and do it themselves. But like, I remember reading her bio and seeing that she had gone to, I think, like Wake Forest Law School. And then she was a novelist. And I was like, what? She went to law school and now she writes novels. I'm like, she's like, this would be my dream come true. Like,
Yeah.
I would love to write stories. Like how amazing would that be? And then I also remember that she was like incredibly expansive for me at that moment because it was this person who had gone to law school and then did
Yeah,
something
totally.
really different. And that kind of unlocked something for me. Um, but I think like when I think back on these moments where I had this real feeling of like, I wish I could do that, or like I want to do that. It's always been around like some form of, creative expression that involves words. And I think that it took me many years of just hearing the things that actually sounded exciting to me and that I actually wanted to do, and then giving those things a try to feel like, wow, I guess that I actually am a creative person, even if I might not be like traditionally creative or like a visually like creative person.
Wow. I didn't I obviously knew about band in law school, but I didn't I hope this doesn't come off. I didn't you buried the lead there with the math. I didn't realize you were a mathlete.
I mean, I have to use a calculator for everything nowadays, but like, back in the day when I was in math classes, it was my easiest subject.
Wow. I don't know why that, like, I'm sure it must have come up in our over because we didn't even tell everyone who I'm sure people, maybe know that we've been friends for like 10 years, but I thought that would have come up. Maybe it did. And I would have remembered that, I think.
I mean,
I
it's like I have to keep just dripping out these interesting facts about myself to keep you interested in
keep
the
it in. Yeah.
relationship.
You don't have to do one thing to keep me interested. I love you beyond measure, unmeasured the level I love you.
The love is
Um,
unmeasured. I was holding in this fact about math to spring it on you today.
wow. Wow. I mean, that's incredible. I think it's funny. Maybe this is gonna sound terrible, but the maybe one of the reasons I don't, it's so surprising to me because one of the defining characteristics of our friendship, I'm just also so happy that that happened for you because you are so creative and it's so long ago now, but it was so much part of your original identity moving into becoming a entrepreneur and having your business was about being a lawyer and being unhappy in that situation and changing it. And I think because it was several eras away from where you are now that it doesn't come up as much, but it's such a huge cool thing that I'm glad that that happened when it did, and it happened for you like relatively early on and young, which is great. And we said this recently because you transitioned out of another situation where I feel like you learned so much. And whenever you try something new, whenever you take on different projects or whatever it is, like for you, it makes you better suited to have conversations with a larger scope of people and have more empathy. And George Saunders talks about this with empathy, where it's like, if you obviously you can't have experienced everything that you're going to need to have empathy for, so you're not going to have like direct experience with empathy always, probably, you know not even that often. However, the way he speaks about it in terms of writing is that, like, if you've been hungry, for instance, you can like summon that to try to apply empathy for what it feels like to be starving, or if you felt, you know, whatever, there are levels to that. And I feel like all the things that you have done or taken on in your life make you such an incredible friend, and then at what you do, because you have this level of nurturing empathy that is unmatched. And I guess, you know, what I was going to say is like a defining characteristic of our friendship is, you know, we're very similar. I guess I always think of our brains as being very similar because we have a similar worldview. We just get along so well. I think part of that, honestly, is just like time and having a comfortability with each other. But part of it is like there are certain situations, anxiety wise, I think, you know, and we can we can get into that. Like we'll tell each other our spirals and understand like, wow, I would really feel that way too. And in a way where I have spoken to other people, you've spoken to other people, even people like very, very close to you, where you're like, they're just never gonna like get it exactly like I do, but we understand that for each other. But the math thing, Sim, like I forget that we're so different. Like I was not good at school. I was not math was a it's a miracle that I ever got through any of it. It was really, really challenging for me. I'm very slow with everything I do. And I think a lot of this has been coming up recently for me. And we've been talking about this because so you've been MVP of friends to me in the last month. For life, you are an incredible friend, but you're really I hope a lot of karma is going to come to you because you've been so supportive in a situation that I've been going through, what that's work related. And I was away for a month from LA and not really with any friends and only talking to you about it. And which I think is honestly, side note, a good thing to do instead of processing with several people. I think it's actually really great if you can have someone you trust and can just sort of talk about it with one person, because I've been historically someone who just like talks and talks and talks about a situation that can make it worse. But anyway, you were so incredibly supportive and really understood what was happening. But part of it was like I had this bit of, and I'm like in the thick of it right now, this bit of shame, I think, around it. Brought up a lot of those feelings from school of like barely getting by in school. I could kind of talk my way into anything. I was really good at writing, not really good, but I was like okay at writing in English, and I could that part was fine. But the math, the science, like, you know, all of it was really challenging. And I did okay. I got through it. But as a grown up, I haven't had to be. I've put myself into these work situations many for the last, you know, several years working for myself, and even prior to that, where I wasn't necessarily always in my zone of like it wasn't everything that just came easy for me. I had to try. There are elements of every job that are more challenging than others, but there are some organizational things, there are some neurodivergenty things, there are just some things where I'm seeing as a grown up like, oh, you were like that then, and it was really hard for you and you didn't know it. And I guess for the question, it's sort of like, I can't even believe it. I made it this far. Like in a way, I'm like, how did I get through college? How did I get through high school? Like, well, you know, like I got good grades. I went to a big state school, and but I got through it. I got through math. I did it all. And I'm proud of myself for like somebody, when I would, speaking of math, this is like the math episode. Somebody
Episode
was,
1, everything you
yeah.
never wanted to know about math.
Oh my gosh. There's a really close friend of mine has a really successful uh has a successful company, and someone who works for her was telling me about someone they hired, and this person was lovely, like they got along really well, but she was just, it wasn't quite working. And the way that she explained it to me was that her and the founder like kind of butted heads. And the founder, when the founder explained it to me, a separate conversation, separate day, she was like, yeah, she was great, but like, this is the way she would do something. And she would go, around the back, through the legs, over the shoulder. Like, she didn't say that, but that's my words, because that's kind of how I do things. Like, and if the path is just like straight, she's going to take it around, through the loop, over here, wait a little bit, then like do a spin, but she'll get there, And when I was doing math as a kid, I remember like I'd show my work sometimes and I would, wouldn't finish, or I would, I'd miss whatever. And I remember one time a teacher looking and be like, you got your, when you have to show your work, you got the answer, but like, I have no idea how, like, I don't even understand everything that happened over here. You didn't do it the way I told you. You didn't use, I have no, like, what sort of spell did you cast to get the right number? And, in math, it wasn't like, oh, well, you got it. Like, okay. It was like, no, you actually need to do it the other way, because you're not going to get done with the test if you don't, So anyway, I don't know if it really answers the question, because honestly, like when I was walking up the hill, I was like, God, should I ask him if there's another question? Because because this becomes a believing in yourself question a little
Yes,
bit, right?
exactly. I totally think, I feel like I think breaking this question down and going deeper, like when I think about what I shared, when I think about what you share, it's like there's identity to this, right? It's like how you see yourself and who you see yourself to be. And then it becomes like a self belief, a self identity. There's so a layer of that here. It's like, who do I believe that I am and who do I believe that I'm not? And I think that in that too, I don't know, I guess I would want to ask someone, I guess I would love to ask you, it is the person who you feel like you're not, is that someone who you want to be, And if not, then I feel like it's more of a shedding of maybe some shame or pressure to be someone who you don't even want to be. It's like, if I didn't feel like I identified as a creative person, but I didn't feel like that was like holding me back at all, it's like, it really doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Like maybe I there are things that I'm like, oh yeah, if I was a creative person, I might do those things. But if I didn't even want to do those things, then why does it matter? Like, it's not important.
Yeah.
But if you feel like I can't do this thing because that's not who I am, but I really want to, or I really wish that I could, then I think that's like a whole different conversation where it's like, whoa, you like how can you see yourself differently, or who can support you to learn how to do this thing that you feel like you can't do, or whose voice is telling you that that's not who you really are. Like, I just feel like there's so much there, but I don't think personally that as adults we should spend our energy trying to figure out how to be someone that we don't even want to be. And so I don't know, Katie, if for you it's like with the way that you might think about things, or the way that you might work, or the way that you might process things, it's like, but do you even like, is it even important for you to think about things or process things differently? Or is part of how you think about things like what makes the things that you do want to do so magical?
You're always so good at breaking things down and helping me understand. I think that's such a good point. I mean, I guess like going off this, like, being organized and being good at school, or not good at school, but being, we live in a world that those things are important. Like, we exist within capitalism. We exist within these structures that make my life's going to be much easier if I can do some of those things. There are ways around it. Like, there are ways to not go to college or not finish high school, or to, um, not have a job where you have to show up on time, or not, like, all of those things. And I've kind of like done that for myself in recently. However, there are some, like, my mom was always really hard on me about safety, like about these sorts of like safety and security things, because she is like you, has a very different analytical brain. And we really butted heads in that way because, you know, every time it'd be the last minute before the thing was due and I had months and I'm the last person to leave, you know, she would just, it really irked her, as it should. And I, you know, really was put in line, you know, to just do it. Right. And I think there is something about like, I I did it. I showed up, even if it's like I can do those things. Like there, this is the question, I guess, as at a, you know, broader level. It's like, if I'm going to keep telling myself that I'm disorganized and I'm not good at school and I'm not, you know, it's like, sure, I'm maybe not going to, you know, get the highest grade and it's not going to come naturally for me, but like I got through and I can get through, and it might, you know, take more of energy than another avenue does for me. But I think that an interesting thing that I think came up for me as I was thinking about this question on the hike today was like, because I was like, God, you know, I don't know what I believe in myself. Like I was like, I don't think I have anything. But the one thing that sort of came up, which is relevant to you, and I think it actually relates to this, is body wise, like body image wise and vanity and beauty, because that's one that I still struggle with, that I still is, you know, pretty paramount in my brain in a way that I wish it wasn't, ebbs and flows. Um, but I think, like you were saying, you were good at math, you were good at band, but you really wanted to be creative, and your sister kind of had that one. And so that was your identity, and you really had to like rail against that. And now you have a, you know, you live a creative life. I think you're right. Like this is all identity. And my friend Crystal pointed this out to me, where she was like, okay, fine, you're not good at math and science and those, you're not gonna be a woman in STEM, like be an artist. And she was like, why don't you identify as an artist? And I was like, well, I'm not an artist. Like I don't make art. So how am I an artist, you know? And she was like, well, figure that out later, but you live an artist lifestyle. So like, why don't you identify with that and see how that goes? And I was like, okay, I'm an artist that doesn't make art. But it did sort of shape something in me where I was like, oh, an artist archetype would be someone like, it doesn't matter if they show up on time, they're like an aloof artist. And I do think those things are important. That's not how I'm thinking, but it reframed this thought in my brain of like, oh, to your point, like, doesn't matter if I don't have some of those skills, like, or does it? And I don't know it, but her reframing that archetype was like, instead of me being like, oh, you know, I just can't, like, okay, be this then. And I think that's interesting. But like to your, what I was trying to say about the creative thing, like you did want that, and you had to like shift this archetype and be expanded enough to be like, oh, I actually like can be like my sister, I have these other skills, I can develop these other skills, etc. And I think for me, something that has been challenging has been this thought of like, all right, well, I'm not really good at school, I'm not really, that's not it, I'm also not really creative, maybe I'll just make my body the thing. Like, not that I'm like, and I also never felt like I was pretty enough, so I was like, well, maybe I can just, okay, that those things are all too much, I'll just restrict food and become that. I could do really well. Like I could, you know, morph my body into this thing it didn't want to be and was really unhealthy and not fun to be around, but I could do that. And so it was a cop out of, I couldn't believe these other things enough. So instead, I'll just put all of my energy, especially, you know, when my life was in this malleable place, I in college and, you know, figuring out a career, whatever, I'll just put all of my energy into restricting food and controlling that. And then I don't have to think about the other things. And honestly, like that has been a through line, like through my 20s and 30s. Well, I'm like just starting my 30s, but it's ebbed and flowed. And I've been, you know, in really good spots with it, but it still comes up as like something that my anxiety will pool over there because I don't want to deal with this other thing. And now I'm really self aware. I am more self aware today than I have been the last 33 years. And I hope that I think I believe that we all become the most self aware, like right before we die. So that is just a given. So now I can kind of see these things happening in these patterns. And, having long-term friendships, I think, is really important, because we never see ourselves clearly. But I've had people call me out and say, like, and that's what intimacy is too. Like, the people who get close enough to you to be like, you've done this a bunch of times before and it's not cool. And how are you going to change? Or, so to answer the question, I'm not really sure if yeah, what's the question again?
Love it. What's something you realized you wrote off for yourself? Why do you think you did? And how did you open yourself up to believe in this option for yourself?
Okay, so then the body thing, what I was going to say about that is, like, all these things that I was like, I would blame it on that. Like, well, I'm not smart enough. I'm not cool enough. I'm not interesting enough. I'll just be thin enough. And then maybe then I'll have that. That'll be it. And then that is something that I've realized, the times where I have been body image off, or not feeling good about myself, or my clothes fitting differently, or whatever, feeling uncomfortable in my skin, I've been able to do. It doesn't matter, like, people don't care what you look like, they care how you make them feel. They want you to show up as yourself. And I think that has been such a continual, um not like sword in my spine or whatever, like, not to be a victim about it, but and I'm not like it's something that we have in my control, but it has been something that I continue to have to be like, no, not again. You see where this goes, but it's really ingrained in there as a cop out to believe in these other areas. And this conversation's helping me now. I'm like, all right, figure out what you want to believe in. And then there have been some times where I'm like, I never thought that, because of these, I can see the downsides of me not believing. Like, for instance, I was just in a city I was in Montreal, and I was riding the subway and going, all these places on my own. And I think there would have been a time in my life, and maybe this is not necessarily belief, but belief is really easy. It's really easy to believe in yourself when you have proof. Like, when you've just done it before, it's much easier to be like, oh, I believe in myself because I just did that, actually. So I think there would have been a time in my life where I was like, oh, you don't know how to navigate a city and ride the subway. And before I moved to New York, as you know, I was just like, I can't do it. I'm never going to learn the subway. How am I going to do it? How am I going to, like, I don't know anybody who ever moved to New York. How could I do it? And I did it. I figured it out. And now I feel very comfortable going to any city in the world, and I can know how to use the subway and go anywhere. And I was not that way before. And I think, that is the example that came to me when I got to the bottom of the hike, because it does sort of feel like, even, have you seen this movie After Hours?
No, I don't even know if I've heard about it.
It's like a slept on Martin Scorsese movie, but they had a showing there was a really cool theater that had great programming right by where I was staying in Montreal. And I wish I would have found it earlier, because in the trip, because I would have gone to more screenings, but I saw two, and one of them was After Hours, and I think it's from 1985. And it's about this guy who is kind of like a yuppie, like uptown guy. And basically it all takes place over the course of a night, and he goes to Soho, and like drama ensues, and it's all sort of this like fever dream. It's really good. It's a great watch. But anyway, I really identified with this character of, like, he feels like he's on the outside of this world, and he just wants to get home, but he really wanted to go. Like, he really wanted to be invited, and he really wanted to go see this girl and go downtown and be in this artist community, but like, he feels on the outside of it, and it's good until it's not, and he's just trying to leave. And that's kind of what the whole movie's about. And I've really felt that way before, where I've identified with a group of people, or I have identified a group of people as special, or put them on a pedestal. And so many different times and eras and cities in my life, where I'm just like, well, if they just liked me, if they just, if I could. And then I always think of something that Tim always says: we all put on our pants one leg at a time. And the more time that you spend with people, the more it's like we all put on our pants one leg. I was probably telling you both about how I had put, a situation or group of people or person on a pedestal. And that's probably, I don't even remember the context he said that in, but I think about that all the time, because the more that is something that I do feel, I do believe in myself in those areas. Like I know I can travel anywhere in the world by myself. I'm very good at that. I feel I believe in myself with it because I didn't have to do the work of believing. I just did it.
Totally.
And so maybe that's my method. And then same thing, like with the body stuff, I have a sample size to be like, oh, that wasn't it actually, that's fruitless to pursue that. And then same with like groups of people and friends and relationships, where it's like the closer you get to people that you put on a pedestal, you realize we're all just people, so
Yes.
I guess those are the ones.
Something I'm thinking a lot about something that you shared around, like, well, I wasn't like good enough in school and I'm not creative enough, and I'm not pretty enough. Maybe I can be thin enough, or like I can be thin enough, that like line of thought that you shared, which thank you so much for sharing that. I just want you to know that I think you're enough across the board. And
Thank you.
I do feel like that that's making me, that's just bringing up so many things for me, which is maybe one of the reasons why we feel held back from pursuing something, like why we write things off for ourselves, is because of identity around those things. What we, let's say we have an idea of like what a creative person is, or we have like an identity around what someone who's good at school is, and it's like, well, I'm not that. Like I can't live
Mm-hmm.
up to that full blown identity, or I don't fully like embody that archetype or something like that, and then we feel not enough. And then it's like, well, I'm not like enough in that, so I'm not going to do that, or I'm not enough at that, like I shouldn't even try. Where, and I think to your point, it's like looking from one thing to another, and then finally, the body stuff, where it's like, okay, I could be thin enough, like that's something that I could do like the right way, or that I could like be good at. It's like, I think we all want to be good, and I think we all want to feel like we're enough. And so when we have this really like high standard or specific standard or way that we feel like something has to be done, and we don't feel like that reflects us in this moment, it's like, well, I'm going to write that off for myself, and I'm going to find something that like maybe I feel like I can be really good at, or I can be enough at. And maybe the way to, you know, open something up as an option for ourselves is to take away like the identity or the enough, or the like archetype around something. And then it's like, well, are you creative enough? Like, what is creative enough? Like, what would that be? Because, like, from the outside, I look at you and I'm like, Katie's doing so many like cool creative things, and maybe it's less about saying, like, am I a creative person, or like, do I identify with like this word or this thing? And more about like asking ourselves, like, what's one small step I can take to create experiences in my life that will show me that this is possible for me, and not worry about like stepping into some like full identity around it. Um, but then also recognizing like when we're pursuing things that might not feel the healthiest for us, or might not feel the most fulfilling for us. And it's like, well, what is, you said like the thinness thing, you mentioned it being a cop out. And I actually think it was like that there's such a loving, like positive intention underneath that. It's like, oh my gosh, you just want to feel enough. You just want to feel good at something. And so this is like the default. And so I think being able to like dig beneath that and see that positive intention is so huge. But for me, like with the creative, like with the creativity piece, it's like, in the beginning, I didn't think like, oh, I am going to be a creative person now. It was just like, okay, I'm going to pursue like entrepreneurship, and it required me to do some like creative tasks. And that helped me to like open up my mind to that. and then you get the experience, and then you feel like, oh,
Yeah.
I can trust myself to do this. Like I can trust myself to take the subway. I can trust myself to travel like anywhere in the world, and do that. And like it doesn't define me. Like I'm not defined by like what I do and don't do creatively. Like I'm just a person. And also I guess like just is a weird thing to put before like being a person. I'm a person, and these are, things that I do, or these are ways that I express myself, or these are things that I struggle with, rather than like creating identity around that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to this point, one of the reasons I think I was getting so tripped up with the question, as I'm like, I'm really thinking it over and hearing your answer too, maybe, and just this is like, feel free to tell me this is wrong. What if believing, I think in my experience, I stay with me. I don't believe that I can believe in myself. Okay. Which pretend that's fine. And it might be. However, I do know that sometimes I just do things and then I believe, right? So like
Totally.
I I had this Kurt Vonnegut quote that I wrote down when I was maybe in like freshman year of college or something. We are what we pretend to be. Be careful what you pretend to be. And it's essentially fake it till you make it. But I used to say it all the time. And I used to think about it all the time. And it was one of the first like self-helpy, not that Vonnegut is like a self-helpy guy, so to speak. It
The
was like
ultimate
before,
self-help guru.
yeah, it was before I got into any of that, which, as you know, I really 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 did. But that was kind of it. Like I think for me, as much as like I've gotten into the sort of reprogram and journaling and like figure it, like the more I overthink that shit, like the more I really try, the worse it becomes. But all the
Totally.
success I've got, not necessarily success, but like, becoming, making a friend or moving or whatever it is, it really has just been when I've said like, okay, what's next, and I've
Yeah.
just done it. And if I do it a couple times, then I start to believe it. And so I think for me, it's like, I honestly like don't believe in myself, haven't really believed in myself much. However, I've done a bunch of stuff and I fix it in post, like I can
Yes.
believe in myself after.
Katie, I love this. And I feel like this is such a beautiful, um, like such a beautiful synopsis of all the things that we've talked about, bringing it together, where it's like, you don't have to, this is going to be so refreshing for people to hear. You don't have to believe in yourself. If they're just do something, like
Yeah.
do something, you'll figure it out along the way. You'll be doing things more and more. And then you'll begin to believe in yourself because you'll have proof like, oh, look, I already did that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that like the the important thing to not gloss over here is like, it's kind of hard to do things when you don't believe in yourself. Like it's a little bit challenging to, there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that for the first time. The more you
Right.
do it, the easier it becomes. But you need some tenacity, you need some support. Like
Yes.
I'm nothing without support. I was listening to this podcast and it said that people who have to have tough conversations, if they know that they're going to talk about it with a friend after, they have someone they can process with, their heart rate will be lower, the conversation will go better. Like there's something to be said for support for sure here. And I think like, yeah, I mean, it's sort of the same thing as like, there's one way to do it is to believe in yourself and amp yourself up and
Yep.
and and really try that way, which I think I kind of had when I was younger. Like maybe that is a little bit of what I was doing, but the older I've gotten, the less I have that sort of blind confidence and belief in myself. But the more I do have of experience of like, I figured that out, I'll probably figure this out. But the
Yep.
important thing to know is that like the belief could be really helpful to develop, because when you really don't have it, when I really write things off, like we were speaking about this in the context of my recent work situation, when I tell myself I'm actually bad at something, I not only won't do it well, it'll be very challenging for me to do it at all. And I will often just not try. And then the really bad part is that the shame starts to bubble up. Like, for instance, I started taking ceramics a couple of years ago, and I was terrible at it to start. I'd never done it before, but I have a lot of friends who are really good at it. And I don't know if it's not like I thought I was going to be good at it. I just thought I would be better than I was. Like, I knew I'd be bad, but I didn't think I'd be like quite that bad. Like, I didn't think it would bring up all the like, oh, you're the worst person in the class. Like, everyone's doing it but you. Did you not listen to something? Like, why aren't you centering on the way? Like, it really brought up all these school feelings. And it made me not want to go at all. I didn't go to practice. Everybody else went to practice. Everyone else, and I would show it. And I kept making the joke at ceramics, like, I'm here for the camaraderie, not the pottery. I'm making friends and I'm just hanging out, like, which is true and kind of what I did in school too. Like, I doubled down on the parts that I'm good at, and I just like, oh, I can't find the remote. I just won't watch TV. I'll do this other thing over here, which is an adaptive quality and, has gotten me this far. But if I wanted to get good at ceramics, like I probably could have, learned hand building, and maybe I still will, but like, I'd have to go to practice, but I
Yeah.
couldn't get over those shame feelings, and I just didn't want to, which is like, in that context, like, all right, I just won't do that because it doesn't make me feel good. And that's what the whole point of doing that activity that I was paying for was. So I think we have to decide, like, you might have to like push through some of that shame, man, and like do it a little bit, because you're not going to get better from this sort of a place.
Anytime that I am feeling a lack of confidence in a situation, I try to remember, I'm like, okay, wait, what do I believe about confidence? I think confidence in someone else is just like, I trust this other person, but confidence in myself is I trust myself. So, like, self-confidence, self-trust. So if I'm feeling like on the surface, I don't have confidence, like if I were to go to a pottery class, I'm sure I would be like, I feel like I could imagine a similar scenario where I'd be like, wow, I am the worst one in the class here, because that was true. Like, when I was a kid, my sister and I went to this painting class together. We did this art class, and they let my sister come to the class. She's 4 years younger than me. She was like the youngest one in the class, and they let her come in, and like, she was the best painter. I think my mom still has like this one painting she did of a tiger at the class, and like my tiger came home and it was just like a effing blob. Like, it was so bad. So I imagine pottery would probably be something similar to start. But when I go into something and I'm like, wow, I'm feeling like low confidence here, like in that example, I'm feeling like I don't know how to make pottery. I try to ask myself, I'm like, what can I trust about myself in this situation? And like, that helps me so much to break out of like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good at this. I'm bad at this. I suck at this, like that whole thing that can kick off the shame. And I'm like, you know what? I have learned new things countless times. I am capable. I can trust that I can learn new things, or like, I can trust that I can ask for help. I can trust that like thinking, asking myself, like, what can I trust about myself in this situation helps me so much to find small, like lowercase c confidence in those moments, rather than maybe like the capital C, like confidence in those moments.
Yeah.
That's something that really helps shift things for me.
Well, that's so good. I So much of this, like, I don't have any of the sibling stuff because I'm an only child, but I think that bit with your sister, like, that had to really be formative. And I'm glad that you have that self-awareness around how that impacted you now. But so much of this, I've done it too, like gone back to childhood and school as a parent. Like, how much are you thinking about this with Ocean Yazi about like, it would be so, it's so high pressure, like, how do you look at this with that?
Oh my gosh, parenthood, like high pressure. Yes. I just want to, it's like I want to do it right. I want to do it perfectly. And that's for sure not happening, and like not even possible. But I think for me, I try to really encourage them to be in a growth mindset, and to try to really encourage them to know that like it's okay to make mistakes and we can learn new things. And I try to just really affirm for them like how much I love them as individuals and as human beings, not because of like what they do or what they're good at. And that's so like that feels so huge. And like it's so interesting. I like brought up the example of my sister being creative because she's, an incredible storyteller and like, she's just a magnificent person in general. My sister and we didn't have like, there was no competition between us growing up. Like it wasn't, I mean, literally, I probably left that art class and I was just like, well, that's her lane. Like, I'm going to find mine. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't have like there was no sense of that in our dynamic. And I feel very thankful for that. But I do try to also cultivate an environment with my kids where they don't feel like they're in competition with one another. And I try to encourage them to do the things that they love, but also like sometimes we have to do things that we don't love.
Yeah.
And, so balancing that, but definitely like trying to encourage growth mindset and trying to just affirm like their hearts and who they are as human beings and how much I just love and like delight in them. I try to tell them that every single day. And I also do things every single day where I'm like, well, send me the therapy bill when you get older. Cause that's for sure gonna, I'm sure I'm doing things right now where my kids are, gonna be adults. And they're like, I can't believe mom did this. But I will say that I am confident that I am trying my absolute best.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're incredible. You're, incredible mom, and they're lucky to have you. Like I'm lucky to have you as a friend. And I also think, like when you were like, I try to encourage them to do things they love, but also that sometimes we have to do things we don't love. Like if I think about that of like, oh wow, I wish my mom would have really put me in more art or notice these therapy things about me or notice maybe I was this or that. Like sure, but also she did a lot of really great things of
Mhm.
like forced me to do things I didn't want to do, so now I know I can. And I think I wouldn't be here talking to you as this version of myself without things that a therapist might say were a mistake of hers, or she might look at back at now and think of as a mistake. But I'm so glad that it all shook out as it did, or it wouldn't, we wouldn't be working with this. And
Me too. I'm
you
so
know
glad it shook out as it did because you're just so fantastic and so wonderful. And I love you so much, Katie. And I'm so glad that we got to do this and that you came on here
first
and
episode,
first
you did it.
episode. I can't imagine my first with anyone else. I'm so thankful.
I made it longer than you wanted it to be. Just that getting it more and more into my realm. If I stick around here long enough, it'll be another 2 hours.
Listen, I'll keep talking to you forever. I can't wait. I'm like, we'll end this episode and I'll start my daily my daily excessive voice texting to you right afterwards.
Well, it makes sense. It's like my podcast is so long for the same reason that took me forever to do the math. Cause I'll make my point, but I'm going to go around the back through the legs, like over the shoulder. So you're so great. And everyone listening, thank you for you can fix some of that in post, but thank you for bearing with me and listening and my storytelling. Not that concise.
I saw something on I was gonna be like, I read something. I saw it on social media the other day that said, is it the journey or the destination? And then it said it was like a text message. So someone sent a text message like, what's more important, the journey or the destination? And then someone else replied and wrote the company. And I was like, I've literally never seen something that I loved more than that. I'm like, I want to frame that in my house. And I think like I'm just so grateful to get to have your company, like wherever we're going on the journey, the destination, whatever it is. I feel so thankful for your company and I love you
Oh,
so
me
much.
too. I love you so, so much. I like real quick related funny anecdote if now we are just doing the view. But last night I had
My dreams are coming true.
just for you, see, believe you did it. Um well, okay, just I'll keep this part I will actually keep tight. But uh, the context of the story, I'm having dinner with my friend Sophie, who and we a restaurant in our neighborhood that was surprising closed. And I knew this information and she didn't. And I knew like some context around it. And so she was like, what happened? Because we were going to go there. And I was like, oh, I'll tell you everything. But then I began with, remember that in the first time I ever went there, you met me there. And remember, you had just come back from shooting that music video. And remember, we sat there and it was the first time I ever had Casio Pepe, and we sat there, and then remember it was kind of COVID-y, and we had all the tape, and she's like, I love that I asked you a question about this other thing, and you went into this nostalgic memory for about like 20 minutes, and I still have no idea what like any of the information I asked about.
Got to keep it nostalgic.
Anyway, that's what you were working with today. It's insufferable, and you're a saint.
It's a delight. It's a delight. Thank you so much, Katie. I love you. Thanks for doing this with me. Happy, happy first unmeasured episode.
Oh my God. To many, many more. Cheers.
Cheers. Microphone cheers.
This was incredible. I love you. You're amazing. I hope you enjoyed it, because I sure did.
I enjoyed it so much.